communities of practice. I care about communities of practice because I think they make a difference, and I think potentially they could make all the difference. And I think we've heard from some great speakers this morning that give us some insight into that, about connecting around a shared purpose, a higher level, about thinking together and how that produces different possibilities for the challenges we're facing. I think that people working in health and care come to work to make a difference, to create value for patients, with and for patients. And I think very often people have got that strong will, they have some ideas, but I think where we're weakest is how we actually do something with that. And I think that connects into what Igor was saying about tacit knowledge, about how do other people make things work, or what's worked in their context, learning with and from each other. And I think that is such a key feature of communities of practice. When you hear Helen Bevan speak about the challenge that we're all facing around the real challenge around improving quality, where we know there's significant variation in terms of improving patient experience and outcomes, the two things that Helen would say that we really need to be focused on is leading knowledge curation. So what do we know about what works, but how it works and how it's being applied, which is a key focus for communities of practice, and also connections. And I think that is so crucial. I've been really struck by what I've read in the booklet around the movement that's taking place across Yorks and Humber with the co-creation network and constellation of communities of practice. And I really don't think you should underestimate what you're developing in this area.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think I've told you quite a bit about what we. Okay, is that better? Yeah, okay. It seemed quite loud earlier on. So I think really the reason why I'm so passionate about communities of practice is because I do feel that they are an excellent way to bring the evidence to life, to make evidence, to translate that evidence into practice, and it's a good way of really making that link, as I said in the presentation, really, around between the published evidence and the people's experience. And, you know, I think can't underestimate how important that is in order to deliver a better service. I really like the fact that communities are owned by the members, that the fact that they cut through the tremendous hierarchy that we have in NHS, I'm sure it's the same here, that we have in NHS Scotland anyway, and it allows people to come to the table. It's very democratic. People can come to the table because they've got a passion for something, because they're interested in the topic, not because they're a consultant or because they've got certain levels of power within the organisation. So that's one of the second real reason for that. And I think the fact that they're transient, and I think it's important to see them as that, so that they are focusing on a problem, they solve that problem, they go on to solve other problems, or they can say, actually, we've achieved what we wanted to do, and we can actually close it. And I think one of the messages I try and emphasise to the people that I work with is that it's okay to close your community. It's okay to say you've achieved what you set out to do, and it's really important to celebrate that, what it is that you've achieved. So I think that would be my three reasons why I'm so passionate about communities.
So I pretty much referred to this question already in the are but to elaborate on that. I believe that the organization today's organization still have are still learning what it means to learn in an organization and as an organization. Now, community of practice is a useful concept because it gives us really language to talk about it in a more explicit, intentional way. There are always, kind of vertical powers in organizations, in terms of standardization, bureaucratization, in terms of hierarchical power. And there are also people's, engagement, things that they care about, some drive for learning. And when we organize these kinds of social learning-oriented structures, it's important to appreciate that probably both sides are important, because the communities also need to be focused, aligned with organizational goals, But I think that what is happening often in organizations is that actually this hierarchical power can be dominating that horizontal one. So I think it's always it's always like a friction between these two. And this community of practice can just help us to think about how we can focus, how can we concentrate on that. Another reason is that I think that a learning organization, which is an organization which is good at learning, needs to appreciate and build and capitalize on such energy, as it was discussed by the speaker just before our panel. And again, this helps us this concept helps us to think about that. And communities of practice also, I think, it is still yet to be applied body of theory or concept, but I have good hopes, and I think that there's still lots of good work to do, and it needs to be taken seriously, carefully planned. Resources need to be allocated to the scale of the initiative, and by seeing you coming here, organizing this event.
Good news, we have one of our virtual panelists here. Liz, do you hear us?
Hello there, yeah. It's a very exciting workshop today.
So, what I asked from our panelists, and you also, is why do you care about communities of practice? Besides your job-related responsibilities, why do you care personally?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really important question. And there's 3 words that spring to my mind or are key drivers for me for my work, and those are feel, think, and do. And all of the literature and the evidence that underpins our work really reinforces the need to bring people together and recognise that it's people that deliver our services, and that our system, and indeed our communities and wider world, it's a social system. So great things happen when you bring people together and when you connect people. And again, a lot of the evidence and research tells us that you don't need to be particularly selective when you're bringing together communities of interest and communities of practice, because we all carry with us tremendous wisdom, thoughtfulness and experience. So the real, the fantastic thing about communities of practice is that they provide the right kind of space and opportunity for us to tap into that wisdom and do things that you couldn't really achieve in a formal hierarchy where you're constrained by program management, structures, and really tangible and sort of hard-edged deliverables. So for me, I think we need to look to our people in the system, because that's where the real resource sits, and that's where the real opportunity sits.
Thank you very much, Liz. So if you could share with us your sense of what's the essence of the difference between networks and communities of practice. Any thoughts on that?
The term network can be used to cover and group a number of different types of groups of people that come together to achieve things. So when we look at the research, we find a spectrum and a continuum, from one end being social movements, peer-to-peer support, very loosely connected groups of people who are passionate about taking forward either individual goals or a collective. At the other end of the spectrum, then you've got networks, and I think it's really interesting today, because when you hear about people talk about the 5-year forward view, they talk about a networked NHS, and I think probably what they're trying to describe there is a program managed set of care, new models of care, which they're describing and sort of sitting in the context of a network. And of course, it will be delivered through a network of organisations. And that's another definition. So that sits at the other end of the spectrum. And then I would put communities of practice and communities of learning in the middle. So these are groups of people that come together with some structure and infrastructure around them, some really shared common purpose areas of expertise, as I've just heard described, but also perhaps in varying degrees, support provided and ways to more formally connect in a different way to those that would sit in a social movement, or those that would sit in more of a hierarchical network at the other end, working as part of a defined programme to deliver some programmatic goals.
I think it's useful to, when you think about difference between community and network, to not to see them necessarily as. I think it's useful to think about the structuring processes. So we can think about networking and community making. So I always see it this way, that networking is about making connections, so being aware of who people are and so forth. At the extreme spectrum, that would be a Facebook list, that there may be people that you don't know, but as Henry Mintzberg says, if you call them your friends, ask them to paint your house. And now, on the other hand, we have community making, which is about sense of identification, so kind of caring about the same things. You can be a nurse, you can go to a conference, and you have a lack of networking, you don't know the other person that you meet at the coffee table. But because you have so much in common, you have a sense of identification, it's so easy to start a conversation, almost like you've known each other for a long time. And I think that a community of practice is at the intersection of these two structuring processes, where there's networking and community making happening aligned at the same time. So that's just kind of to elaborate the previous thoughts.
Thank you, Liz and Igor. That's very helpful. Ron?
Hello. I've got sort of two questions, but they're not very big, and they sort of connect, I think. So, and the first one I don't think there's an answer to, so you don't have to worry. The first one's actually about the involvement of the users or the patients or the carers. And in Doncaster, I think the figure is about 5,000, but it's something like that of people working greater than 50 hours a week, providing unpaid care to their relatives. And I'm sure that's replicated nationally. So carers by and large are on their knees, so asking them to then take time out is such a huge ask, and you know, the way society is going, there's going to be more need for that, because there's going to be less available from you know, from the NHS and social care. So I think that's something we really need to look at. That was my sort of, that was a statement, I suppose. So that wasn't really a question. The question I really had was about geography, because Yorkshire and Humber is quite big. The Highland, well, Scotland's not too small itself, is it? But the Highland, I just noticed you had the Highland region there, and it looked massive, really. And I struggle with connecting with people, attending meetings, for example, coming to meetings. I mean, I'm sure for all of us coming here today has been a bit of a nightmare in some respects. We've had to move things and, you know, swap things. It just seems such an incredible block for me connecting with people. It seems a lot of the computer systems don't talk to one another. You know, particularly NHS ones don't allow in certain programs, and that's one of the things I find maddening. I just wondered if in Scotland they'd cracked it, or you had the same problems.
No, we've certainly not cracked it in Scotland either. That was why I brought up that picture of the fact there are the different health boards, because no, if one person's working, I mean, they can see each other across the Clyde, but they work in a completely different IT system. There is no way that they can access the same details or anything, so it is a real challenge. And it's a challenge that we've met by having to create our own bespoke materials now. People criticise us quite frequently about the fact that we've tried to build a toolkit that supports communities of practice. And okay, that's fine. You know, I take that criticism. It's not necessarily the best use of public money, but the reason we did it was because people cannot access any open source software, etc., in the territorial health boards. They can't use Twitter, they can't use LinkedIn, all these very different services. So because our system is sitting under the knowledge network URL, then people can access it, and that's why we've done it. We make it as easy as possible, and the real benefits come where people are working across the river, so that people want to share documents. So somebody in Greater Glasgow and Clyde can share a document with somebody who's working in Highland by uploading onto our system, and that definitely brings people together. The issue of travel is huge. People no longer have budgets to travel. They can't come to face, and the use of WebEx has been huge. Although that's challenging in its own right, you've got to really facilitate it well in order to make sure people are engaged and are taking part, but it has made an enormous difference. And the Highlands and Islands use telecare and using video conference, etc. So that there's definitely opportunities for communities to tap into that, so that they are making sure they're making these connections. But yeah, it's difficult. And then we bring social care into it, and of course nobody talks to social care systems either.
I think it's a really, really good point that you raise, something that we're all seeking to address. And I think the size of Yorks and Humber, the population is about the same as Scotland, about 5 million. Is that right? 5 million, yeah. We've been working, again, with Jönköping around developing a massive open online course to enable people to connect around the world, to look at developing skills and applying those in practice in improving health and care. And so we've had to come from a very low base in terms of how do you connect virtually, and have had quite a bit of success using Google Hangout and Blackboard Learn, and finding different ways of connecting. So we got to a point where people in my team know people who they've never physically met in Sweden more than they know people across the floor in the office, actually. So there are some really great technologies which are, so every month we have a live Google Hangout session as well. So we have a session by Göran or somebody else from around the world. And that works really well, and you have a Twitter feed, and so there are technologies, and I can see how some of those principles could really support the development of communities of practice. So if you, we can certainly share our early learning on that. And just to say that we will be launching with Jönköping the massive open online course on the an 8-week programme on the 13th of April, which will ensure you have the information on if that's of interest.
I'd like to invite you to join me in thanking our panel.